I want to welcome all of you today and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to talk with us today. As you may know, a lot of us are here today because of the relationship that we both have with Sister Carol D'Angelo. I met Carol through my colleague Ben Price, actually, and due to our common interest in protecting the rivers, lakes, and waters that we all care so deeply about and the paradigm shifting rights of nature movement. Carol also came to Cleveland back in October 2023 at part one of our Truth, Reckoning, and Right Relationship with the Great Lakes event. And she gave really powerful testimony at that gathering. And you can all watch that on CELDF's YouTube channel under the playlist of Truth, Reckoning, and Right Relationship Part 1. And we'll also share that link at the bottom of the conversation when we post this. And I kind of think, I'm guessing we're all on the same page, but you guys will clarify this in our conversation, that just as the rivers, waters, and all of nature are constantly evolving, so are all of us. And Carol exposed me to the organization ROAR, Religious Orders Along the River. And so that inspired me to go back to our CELDF Democracy School curriculum, which I admit I hadn't looked at in a while, and revisit our pieces on past movements like abolition and women's suffrage and civil rights. And all of these movements, I noticed, had a lot of looking at them through a moral lens and looking at the issues of their day. And it got me thinking about the rights of nature movement. And, you know, I've worked on this for like the last 15 years, and I felt that this perspective was kind of missing. It's not out front and center a lot of times. When it comes to environmental issues, it seems like most of the activism centers around scientific data and measuring the harms and with statistics and all that. And of course, from our perspective, through the lens of law, right? The legal perspective. You know, but and then I circle, but is it moral? Is it moral to use nature and the waters as a resource and also as a dumping place, you know, for all our waste just for profits and the profits now? You know, is it moral to jeopardize the lives and health of all the other species in the ecosystem now and then also the future life, right, on Earth for our benefit and profit now? And rarely, but I'm hoping that this is changing somewhat today, but I didn't hear a lot of conversation going on about the morals and values of our current Western culture and our culture's treatment of nature. And then, of course, we also have the current bill in New York, the Great Lakes and New York Waters Bill of Rights that Representative Burke has reintroduced into the New York legislature for the 2025-2026 session. And when reviewing all the people who signed the support letter, which we'll also link at the bottom of this podcast so people can also sign if they want, I noticed that there was this really high percentage of signers who were connected to religious organizations in one way or another. I mean, it really stood out. There was that many. So that's kind of just how this conversation came together today. And I'm really excited to get started and hear from all of you. So just as a quick to let everybody know who's watching, who is on the call with us, you can expand on this, but we have Carol D'Angelo, who's the Director of Office of Peace, Justice, and Integrity of Creation, Sisters of Charity of New York. We have Leanna Varga, who is the Executive Director for the Mission for the Dominican Sisters of Hope. Alice Marie Giordano, Justice, Peace, Integrity of Creation Coordinator, Ursulines of the Roman Union Eastern Province. Holly Rockwell, who is the Justice Promoter for the Sisters of St. Joseph of Rochester. And also Pat Russell, who is a member of ROAR. So welcome. And the first thing we're going to start with is, I think it would be great if we went around and each of you introduced yourself, maybe where you're originally from, where you were born or raised, if you want to talk about that. And do you have a fond memory of that place? Or if you feel more connected to another place, maybe it wasn't, you know, where you're from birth-wise, but you want to share that. And the reason I like to start there is because I believe one of the first steps that we humans need to make is connecting to the place where we are and a place from love for that place, because I feel like if we're connected to that place, we're more apt to want to protect it, even if it involves some risk. So I'm going to go ahead. And I think that's also why so many of it's so easy for decision makers or people we say are the decision makers and have the authority in our system currently, whether it's elected agency officials or shareholders of a corporation, to harm and destroy the natural world because they aren't connected to those places they're harming and destroying. So I'm going to open it. And who wants to start?
I'll just very briefly say, so I'm Carol D'Angelo, and I was born in the Bronx. You'll probably hear my Bronx accent over this time. But from about 7 years of age to 18, when I entered religious life, I grew up in Eden Wall projects. And so my memory of growing up is living in a project, a city housing project, and how great it was to go to Orchard Beach. And sometimes we'd have to take 2 crowded buses, stand on bus lines to get there, and how great it was to be outside in nature. But I think I want to say that also that in this area of the Bronx that I was living in, it is part of the Hudson River Valley bioregion. Practically all my life, my ministry life, has been in the Hudson River Valley bioregion. And so I've been very privileged to live near the Hudson River, near the East River, on Staten Island, where I could see, the harbor and everything. And so the Hudson River and the waterways in New York were very precious to me. And of course, then becoming a member of ROAR and being involved in ROAR for so many years, I not only got to experience the beauty, but I also got to know some of the violations that were happening. And of course, the violations to the river and to the bioregion are really violations to us also. So that's part of my history.
Thanks, Carol.
I was born in the Bronx also and really loved the city, going down to the city and driving past the river into the harbor. And so often when relatives came from other places, we would visit and show them all around. But as I grew up, I became aware more of the upper Hudson. And it was through retreats up at Mariondale that I grew to see the beauty of so much. And traveling up the river with John Lipscomb on the Riverkeeper boat, again, made me aware of the real challenges to the river. We went past the power plant, and he explained so much about what a threat that was. And then I became aware also of what Investor Associates for Social Justice was doing to try to challenge those who were destroying the river, and some of the successes that they had in getting the river, getting people to begin to clean up the destruction that they had wrought. And so I've really seen how important it is for us to be involved in this. And also, as I taught in the Bronx, I taught youngsters who were in areas of the Bronx where there was great pollution, and they were really affected by this. And so all of this is why I'm here.
My name is Pat Russell. I was born in the Bronx, New York. My dad and my brother and I used to always go to Yankee Stadium. So I really am a Bronx kid. And I met the Sisters of Charity in elementary school because the Bronx is divided into parishes. And I went to a parish in the Bronx that the Sisters of Charity taught. So I first met them there. So I feel a kinship, and somehow they keep on coming into my life. And with ROAR and Sister Carol and the other people I have met through ROAR, I'm starting at the end because I feel I have received such an enrichment from that connection. I'm on the social justice team of the Ursulines of the Eastern Province. I became a loan officer after I entered the Ursulines, and so I did affordable housing and childcare lending in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. So I got to know the local region fairly well. But more recently, I was on our team, our leadership team, and in the closing years of my ministry, I would often go up to Andros-on-Hastings, where our elderly sisters and frail sisters are now living. We no longer live in a separate convent. They're in a nursing home. And several visits there have called my attention to the Hudson River and the beauty that that river gives to the experience of living there, because it's right, Andros on Hastings is right on the river. And from the early morning till later at night, there's a presence there that I think if we stop and are quiet, we feel something of that connection with nature. And so when we finally got to this idea of nature has rights, I just feel so akin to it. And this Burke resolution or bill, I think, is especially important. And the more we can raise awareness about it, a long time before it actually happens. But one last thing about my work as a loan officer. The group was called Leviticus Alternative Fund. And if you know the citation from the book of Leviticus, it's the land does not belong to you, it belongs to God. You are but sojourners on this land. So our experience of any kind of biblical training or reflection kind of just resonates with what we're trying to do in this kind of work. So I find it very enriching.
Thank you. Thanks, Alice, Marie, and Pat. That was really lovely. Holly, Leanna, who wants to go next?
And go. I'm unmuted. I think I had a similar, like very different but similar upbringing to what Carol described, in that I grew up in a suburb in Rochester, of Rochester, in a very ordinary sort of working class suburb, but it had a creek. There was a creek in the side yard, and I spent, all my formative years in that creek. And my parents had grown up in the city of Rochester and were loved nature. Like so we were always in parks, and they had big gardens that I worked in and all that. So I think it was like built in, like in my formative years, this love of nature and this intimacy, which I think is missing from a lot of people through, not necessarily through no fault of their own sometimes, mostly. And then I grew up and, got my degrees, and in law school I read Should Trees Have Standing? And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so fantastic, because it's that idea that, the loved things that I had. I'm thinking particularly of a weeping willow that grew by that creek that I practically lived in. That being, was beloved clearly and deserved protection as in its own right. And so that kind of blew my mind, but there was nothing much going on. So I travel along and do various things, and training to be a master naturalist, and practiced business law for a while, and ended up here doing sort of advocacy work. Started with climate advocacy and then kind of broadened. But don't I find CELDF and Laudato Si? And the two things are so similar to me. Laudato Si being that document from Pope Francis, where he talks about the integral, that things have their own value in their own right. They're not just as resources. One of my most hated terms is like environmental resource or, ecosystem services, those terms. So I really feel like the new things and this new unfolding sort of giving voice to what I experienced when I was 10. And it's been really fantastic.
Full circle.
Yes, exactly.
I love how you described you grew up in the creek.
Yeah.
You're a creek creature. And that's lovely. So I would take it you would do anything to protect that creek.
Yeah.
Okay, and Leanna, last but not least.
So I grew up in a very different way in rural southwestern Pennsylvania near the border of West Virginia. So on literally the road was County Line Road between Westmoreland and Fayette County. This was half an hour from the nearest grocery store, which we would drive to once a week. So a very rural upbringing, and so rural that we couldn't get cable television, and we had little antenna on the top of the TV. I say that because there was really nothing to do inside the house, so we spent a lot of time outdoors, and I realize now what a gift that was. That a lot of my memories of childhood are lying on the grass growing really high around me and looking at the clouds, hours just doing that. And that was what we had to do, and there were rocks in our large boulders in our yard that I remember still, the shape of them, just sitting on these boulders and building forts in the woods, and the Appalachian Trail ran right behind my house. So I think without realizing it, I really did grow up with this strong connection to nature. And then I've lived in the Hudson Valley and in Croton-on-Hudson for the past 10 years. So I have a different relationship with nature here. I have 2 children who are teenagers growing up in a very different way with devices and a lot of screen time and every channel under the sun to watch and be entertained by. And one of the reasons I moved to this area was because I thought it would be closer to nature. It's a way to live in the suburbs in a sense, but still be closer to nature. So I try to get them out on the Hudson River. We swim in the Croton River. We kayak and canoe and paddleboard on the Hudson. And so I'm hoping that some of that is sinking in, though my children have a very different experience and relationship and distractions than I had as a child. So I feel a little bit wistful about that. But in my work life, I work as the executive director for mission for the Dominican Sisters of Hope. And in that capacity, I've come to meet wonderful people like Sister Carol and Alice Marie and Pat Russell and all the members of ROAR. And I serve as the congregation's representative to ROAR. And the sisters have taught me both here and through ROAR so much about the relationship with nature, I think, which, as a child I experienced but didn't have the words to describe. And now I think as an adult, I was concerned about the environment. I've worked, in college, I worked for the recycling department as my work-study job in college and drove a recycling truck. And I looked at it from that kind of point of view, but I didn't think about the spirituality of our relationship with nature. And I think that's what working with ROAR and the Dominican Sisters of Hope has really helped me to grow into, and connects very much with the Rights of Nature movement.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure a lot of the people listening, it's going to awaken in them, some memories, hopefully, of how they're connected to nature as well. I guess one of the things I'm curious about is, when did you become aware of or interested in actually protecting like nature, water, or forest? Was it something you read or someone you had contact with? I know you've alluded to some of it, and like Holly, you mentioned reading Christopher Stone, Should Trees Have Standing? But I think because so much of our activism, I guess, is like centered around like, we think of it as big things, right? Like that we have to go to big events or plan big events and big protests and thousands of people in that. But what I'm like looking at is like actually, and I try to tell people, sometimes it's just someone you meet, right? Or something you read and how it impacts you so greatly. And it's not a big thing, it's a small thing, but then it leads to changing maybe the direction you're taking in your own life. So I'm curious and you don't have to all answer, but if something comes to mind, something you read or someone you came in contact that did shift your thinking, if you'd share that, I think that would be great. Or at least get you to question too, what you had been taught. Because so much of this in our culture, I think, is, it's what we've been taught. And so it's that being exposed to something else that gets you to question that, I guess, and maybe think differently.
Tish, there's so many different ways I could probably answer this question. So I'm trying to think of the best way. But let me begin by saying, because I've been very privileged in my ministries to really learn so much from the people. I'm going to say from the people. And one of my earliest ministries was I was sent to East Harlem. And then I eventually moved and lived in East Harlem to start a program that was going to be meaningful for the people. And that was out of the New York Foundling Hospital. And so I got very, very involved with the people of East Harlem and started a teen parenting program. So I won't go too much into, but you can imagine some of the issues that at that time in the 70s and then early 80s, what we were experiencing. And there was a lot of fires started because the land was so precious that people were being burned out of their apartment buildings so that they could have, what do we call that again? Gentrification, right? So it was a lot of pain. And again, having really been steeped in trying to live the gospel and being faithful to Catholic social teaching and the gospel, things became very real to me in terms of what did it mean to be the body of Christ, because we are all part of the body of Christ. We're all brothers and sisters to each other. And the whole mystery of passion, death, and resurrection, and where we, from St. Paul, where one suffers, we all suffer. And when one shows, we're all joyful. And so I really had the privilege of accompanying people in so many different situations and understanding what that mystery of the body of Christ really meant. And at that time, my primary ministry was really to work and minister with these people. But at the same time, I was part of what you would call the Earth Committee, the Earth Charter Committee, because we did have justice committees in the congregation. And so I was also becoming aware of Tom Berry's work and his thinking and other people's thinking. So that was also part of it. But eventually life moves on. And then I had a job that was in Marydale, not Mariondale, Marydale, in Nyack, Marydale Faith and Life Center. And there was a grant, so I was only able to be there 2 years. But I was trying to start a center, a sustainability center. And I had an experience there with a hawk. I was in a little cabin at the foot of Hook Mountain in Nyack. And this little cabin was truly a real cabin amidst these beautiful grounds that the sisters had there. And I had snakes in it sometimes, certainly mice. I had different kinds of animals. But it was a very challenging program. And we did a lot on the journey of the universe, on the news story, cosmology. I had been seeped in it before then, but I was working with groups, trying to teach other people about it. But I was doing other things. But as you know, sometimes when you do programs, you might have 10 people, 8 people, and you put out so much energy. So one day I was really very, very, a little bit discouraged. But I come out and there's this hawk right in the tree next to me. And it's just looking at me. So, of course, what do I have to do? I talk to the hawk and I say, "Oh, hawk, it's nice to have you here. I wonder how many people are going to come to this program," as I walk down to this beautiful barn. I hope some people come. So I walk down towards the barn and it flies to the tree near the barn and it continues to look at me. Somehow in that experience, as I'm talking to the hawk and it's following me, so to speak, I really had a real deep sensation, an experience that this body of Christ is not just humans. It's more than humans too. And so it was a very vivid experience, which maybe I prayed about, thought about, reflected on before, but it just sharpened for me the reality that we are when we talk about the Earth community, the One Earth community, there are many communities in it, but we really are all one. It's like Brian Swim has said, we're not born into this world. We're born of the earth. We are, when we really think about it, we are of the earth. We come from the earth. And so that experience really sharpened for me that we really are journeying together, the humans and the more than humans. And so, and I maybe through some of the other questions, I'll talk more about it. But Holly spoke about Laudato Si. Laudato Si put into words that came out in 2015, Pope Francis's encyclical on care for our common home. But that put into words what many of us women religious had been praying about, thinking about, talking about, doing. Oh, I'm going to say since the 80s, the 90s, where we really saw ourselves as very interconnected, very that integral ecology that's so hard to understand and live into. We've been trying to live that, but it's a journey. It's a journey.
Mm-hmm. An evolution. Thank you, Carol. Anyone else want to share anything? A memory?
I have one kind of vivid memory. I think I was a weird kid, Tish, but when I was alive for the first Earth Day, and I was on fire with it. Like, I was like, what? There's burning rivers. Like, I could not get my head around it because it didn't line up with what I experienced in the creek. And so I got all the neighborhood kids, and we made chalk murals on the road so that all the adults could see what we were thinking, and we drew earths and so that, to your point about little actions, right? But it was like, and I still remember it. It must have meant something to me because it was it's an odd thing for a kid to do, I think, on my own, no parents, nobody, organizing that. And that, I think I have had that sort of ache or fire my whole life. And then I had a similar experience to Carol's too, where I had just volunteered at a soup kitchen for, 15 years or something, once a month, not a big commitment, but I had that feeling. And then as part of this Master Naturalist program, you have to do citizen science, care for the earth type stuff. So I was surveying for the hemlock woolly adelgid, which is destroying the hemlock trees on the East Coast. And so you go out in the woods and you see where you find them, and you let the appropriate people know. And as I was doing it, I felt like that's exactly the same as feeding these guys that come to the supper program. It felt exactly the same. You look at the tree, you know that there's a life in there, and I just, like, that kind of hit me in the face. That sense of like, oh, it's all one thing. It's all one thing that arises out of this, my faith, and out of my belief that the God, and it's a Jesuit God in all things. So those were just two little things that I can point to say that kind of made all this.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate that. And it's funny because we're taught something different, that we are separate, right? And so it's like, yeah, when you have those experiences, yeah, and you're like, you think right away, like, is there something wrong with me? Like
this is weird.
Yeah. And so I don't think it's weird at all, but it's like,
No,
I
no.
understand why people think it is. Even just you, Carol, talking to the hawk. I mean, it's like, we're not raised in a culture. I mean, we know there's other cultures that's totally normal for them. But for us in this Western culture, I think my neighbors think I'm a kook, right? Because in the winter I put out bird feeders, and that's what I do. I talk to the birds. I'm like, okay, I'm coming, so, but that's not normal, quote, right? Sure.
No.
We need to shift that. That's what we're working to do.
Along those lines, I think I had a shift because of a tree. And it was a giant pine tree growing outside the first house that I lived in Croton-on-Hudson. I lived in for about 6 years. And this tree was massive. I mean, it may have predated the house, and it really shaded the house too. And I would go to the front windows in the living room every day and drink coffee and look out at this tree that was right there. And there were birds in the branches, and we had a bird feeder underneath, and we had these amazingly beautiful woodpeckers that would come. We had a woodpecker feeder and we had a regular bird feeder. And I just really loved this tree. And then the branches started growing over the driveway. So now we couldn't even drive the car into the garage without, it was like going through a car wash. Like the branches of the tree would scrape the car. So we said, all right, we've got to take down some of these branches, and called a local tree expert. And so it was very expensive, to get somebody to do this. So we went as homeowners with the cheaper version, which was someone who wasn't quite as knowledgeable, I think, about trees. Anyway, arranged to have some of those branches cut, came home that evening to find that they had cut branches all the way up, like halfway up the tree. So now this tree that had been this beautiful kind of Christmas tree shape was more like an umbrella, where there was a long trunk and then just these branches coming off the top. And there were scars all over the bark where these beautiful branches had been chopped off. And I'm going to cry talking about it, but like my reaction was so emotional. I didn't understand it myself. Like it is one of those moments that I think I felt very weird, that word, like what is happening to me? But I wept like I have not wept for much else in my life when I saw that tree and the scars that were on the bark from all the branches that had been taken off. The birds were gone and that whole ecosystem was gone. And I realized I really did have a relationship with that tree. And I remember talking to a sister about it and just like trying to make sense of what I was feeling. And she suggested that I go just spend time with the tree and apologize to the tree, because we had done it. We had called the people we had chosen the cheaper option, of the less, knowledgeable tree cutter. And then, of course, I was reading all things about how if you cut too many of the branches and you cut them at the wrong time of year, and it was all of those things. We had cut too many, we had cut them at the wrong time of year. I'm like, what if this whole tree dies because of us? And yeah, it was I think the turning point had come in the relationship in a sense, but there was also a sort of turning point when I realized what had happened, and that I was experiencing on such an emotional level, the impact and the sorrow and the grief and the repentance for what we had done.
That's an amazing story. And again, that idea that you're thinking like, what's wrong with me? It's like, that's again, our cultural, what we've been taught, like, no, there's nothing wrong. There's something I think wrong with the people who can cut down a whole forest, right? Or a whole ecosystem, or dump poisons into the Hudson River and into Lake Erie. Those are the ones that I think there's something wrong with, not you for crying about that. Mm-hmm. But, that's that shift that has to happen, and I'm not quite sure how, but I think this conversation will obviously affect some people and think about things like that too. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I guess one of the things I'd like to talk about is, and this gets into a lot of, this is time I'm actually asking you guys for advice too, right? Like seeing what you guys have to say, because much of my work and experience is with local communities and people trying to stop harms, right? And harmful projects that they're coming up against. And it's a powerful and structured system. And with fear, they use fear a lot, to keep people from actually doing this protection, right? That they might feel like you do, Leanne, about that tree, right? In their community or whatever, but then that fear by these powerful systems comes down on them and they don't step up to protect, myself included. So I'm not, this isn't being, like judgy or anything. And I guess it's by sharing our own stories, I guess, that we can help build more confidence and courage in people to stand up for maybe their community or nature-focused values, and even to protect other humans, right? I know myself personally that when I hear an inspirational story of courage, it helps me to be more bold sometimes. So I guess I'm curious, with you guys as members of or being connected to one of, the most wealthy, patriarchal, powerful institutions in the world, which is the Catholic Church, how you may have dealt with some situations when you don't personally agree with what church doctrines or rules are, because we know we don't all always agree on everything all the time. So have there been any like challenges and conflict, and how maybe you maneuvered through those times that maybe listeners could relate to in their own situations like this, where they're up against, like the local government, let's say, or the county government? They feel powerless, and like, how do we maneuver this?
One of the thoughts that came to my mind with this question and all that is that those of us who are women religious and those of us who are working with women religious and representing women religious congregations, I think it's always good for us to remember that religious life is called to be prophetic. And, there's the traditionally canon law, there's the ordained, and the lay and religious are considered also part of the lay, but there's been that, a little distinction. But in the history of religious life, we are called to be prophetic. And I was thinking about Vatican II, mid-1960s, when religious congregations were invited to go back to their charism, to go back to their roots and kind of re-examine, rediscover their charism is, and how do they then live their charism in response to the signs of the times. And the signs of the times is a phrase that women religious are very, very aware of. And what it means is what's happening now in our current cultures, in our current global situation, in our local situation, and how do we respond that in light of our call to be gospel followers of Jesus, live the gospel, and of course, Catholic social teaching. And so for me, this whole rights of nature movement really is part of what we've been doing. I'm going to say since the beginning of my congregation, 1809, when we were founded. We did it in different ways then, but we've tried to respond to what the signs of the times were now. And we definitely have been called in so many ways to recognize, and Laudato Si has made it very clear, that the climate issue is very, very important. And that, how did we say that? The social, the economic, and social, economic, and I guess environmental. You cannot look at these three issues separately. They're all very interconnected. And so I know even for us as a congregation, when we're addressing racism, we're looking at then how does this impact us in terms of climate, in terms of nature, when we're addressing migration, when we're addressing poverty, when we're addressing all these issues, and that we're called to live these gospel values of inclusivity, solidarity, of respect and reverence, that this all has to be addressed very integrally. So I feel that we as women religious, we've been on this trajectory for many, many years. And just to bring in here, I forget if it was 3 years ago now, Pope Francis invited the different sectors in the church, and yes, religious life was one of the sectors, but he invited institutions and organizations and families and parishes, healthcare institutions, to go on a 7-year journey towards transformation and ecological conversion. And there was, different goals in this in different areas. And ecological conversion is a very important part of this journey that we're on, and that we are called to an ecological spirituality, to a new way of living, a new way of being. So I feel that we've been kind of living this, and what's happened now is it's kind of, we as the Catholic Church have been invited into this, and I could say more later, but we definitely are on this journey to, as Laudato Si says, humans are not separate. They're not apart, meaning a new word, part, P-A-R-T. They're not apart. They're not separate from the environment, but they're a part, A-P-A-R-T, a part of the environment. We cannot look at ourselves separately from nature.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, Carol, because again, so much of, and it came up in your testimony at the Truth, Reckoning, and Right Relationship, and so many people attribute, religion, right? And I'm talking about like the doctrine of discovery, papal bulls, all those things, of being responsible for this separation of humans from nature. And so that's like, a huge thing that always comes up. And then, of course, our laws, our legal system, right, then followed along in that same path. And so these are huge, like you said, institutions and cultural precedents and legal precedents that have been set over so much time. And so again, there comes in that fear of people challenging this. So I kind of see these parallels between the legal system, right, and then the church doctrine, right, that you're saying, like trying to overturn some of these things to get people to shift and think differently. And so that's that big thing, like, the cultural shift. How do we make that happen? So yeah,
And see, I think just because I think it's important, when you say, how do we address this and people address it in different ways. Some people address it by leaving the church, some people address it by being within the church. But I think it's important that not to think of this as a monolithic structure, but the culture, because that's very interesting when you look at Catholicism. It has so many diverse cultures within it, because part of the gift is that people, especially now, since Vatican II, we're being invited to celebrate Catholicism within the culture that we are in. And Thomas Berry is very, very clear, I think, in terms of how important, when we talk about the ongoing development of the universe and ongoing creation, is culture is a really very important thing, because we as humans are the ones that are carrying on the culture. We're the ones that are, through our consciousness, trying to evolve a consciousness, a culture that is more conscious, that's more aware. And maybe this is the part where I can say that what Tom Berry is inviting us to is, how do we live a mutually enhancing earth-human relationship? And I think that's why religious organizations along the river, and why many religious who have gotten into this, we have Sisters of Earth. There's a group called Sisters of Earth, and we've been I forget how many years this has been an organization, a network, but we are part of an evolving culture, there are pockets of culture that are seeing this. I see it much more than even in 2015 when the encyclical came out. I can see a big difference, although it might not seem like it. Yeah. Holly, yeah?
I would say one thing, I mean, this is my personal story, is that I think like Leanne's story was so moving to me, Leanna. And I feel like there's a part of saying, like, we started out with dominion, right, in the church, and we have dominion. It's for our use and for our abundance and use of this, as if we were separate, so we were part of that story, and that everything, like, we are like the great chain of being and all that business about how we're the highest, only angels. And so I think we have some atonement. I think we have some grief to process. And I know for me, there has been some time, and my prayer still includes, I'm so sorry that I was part of, that we have done this, that we were part of and received this great integrated creation, and we chose to feel like we were tiny kings, So I think the atonement and the grief and the, apology is really critical and can be practiced even now. Now, that said, Carol's right. We've moved. And so in contrast to that, one of the things I've always sought out is those other voices, those prophetic voices. So you can find it in St. Augustine, who's saying, read the book of nature. It's the original scripture. You can find it, all that far back, all the way through to, Thomas Berry. And I would put, who's our beautiful woman theologian that has Ask the Beasts, Elizabeth Johnson, we moved to stewardship, which was great. I mean, I don't know when exactly that took place, but we moved from dominion to, okay, it's us to care for. And now I think we're moving to, it's not ours to care for in a patronizing, charitable way, but as if we're kin. And Elizabeth Johnson has this beautiful, well, is your charity broad enough for bears? Are you going to include all the creatures as your kin? So we're on this trajectory, but I do think there's some work to do in owning what we were part of, and, prayerful reconciliation with the harm, the part we played in the harm. I mean, I think I have had to feel like I have had to own that and do some personal reflection about it.
Thanks, Holly.
So let me just say, because I think Holly touched on a very important piece. And I think this is something that certainly is being addressed in terms of how important it is for us to lament. I know LCWR, Brian Massingale's talk, I think it was last year at the LCWR presidential, at the assembly, he really called us forth to make sure that we do spend time in terms of lament, because we are part of the problem, we're part of the solution. So I just want to say what Holly said, I think is really very, very important. And we're talking about this certainly with the earth. You know, we're talking about this with racism. We're talking about this of how we're treating our migrants today, not just nationally, but globally, in terms of this tremendous global problem that's not being addressed. And we're talking about it in terms of definitely the devastating impact that we humans are having on the earth, that how to lament. And with that comes, I think, also, how do we help ourselves, help others? Because when there's a lot of pain and there's different ways people handle it. And sometimes people just have to shut it off, not even look at it, bury it, suppress it, lash out in anger. And I think that's one of the things that I know I feel through my work with LCWR and their call to transforming grace towards transformative justice. How are we going to, as women religious, bridge the great divide that's happening, especially in our country and certainly in our world, but bridge this divide, because there's so much fear, there's so much anger, there's so much polarity. And so we're not just talking about our earth-human relationships, but we're definitely talking about human-human relationships. So how do we address all this together? That's a real challenge. And I think this is the place where we are being called as women religious to enter it from a contemplative stance and grow into that contemplative stance, that listening, opening stance. And I guess I'm appreciative that that includes also that lament, that reparation, and it really includes sitting with the pain the pain of the world, the pain of other humans, the pain of the more than humans. And this is not easy. And for me, this is something that's a real challenge, because it's very hard to have conversations now. So we're talking about rights of nature and culture change. It's really very hard for us to have conversations with people who see us, I'm going to say, who see me in my work with peace, justice, and care of creation as way out there, as very liberal. They do not see me as a woman who's trying to live the gospel, as a woman of faith, who believes strongly in Jesus's teachings. So, yes, rights of nature is a really very, very important thing. And I see this as important, as is my work with trying to, the racism, the land that's been taken away from the original landholders of our country. It's all one.
It's really interesting, Carol, you would bring that up, because I face that in my work too. I mean, obviously with rights of nature, and that comes up a lot, and people be like, you're going to fight for the rights for nature when we have so many humans that are suffering. And so then the racism comes up, and, you know, and the social justice issue or environmental racism you hear, and it's like I would like, you know, it's all interconnected. You really can't separate these things. And yet our culture is so good. That's another thing that we're good at, right? Is reductionism, separating, dividing us. Divide and conquer has been around forever. And it's like, yeah, that's difficult, but I appreciate you bringing that up because it is so interconnected.
I have a slightly different angle on this as well, on your question about challenging authority and kind of, because I work for Catholic Women Religious, and yet I grew up in the Episcopal Church. I'm still an active member of the Episcopal Church. And we've had a lot of changes in my adult lifetime with regards to the ordination of LGBTQ plus priests, gay marriage, and the way, I have seen those changes. I'm 56. When I was 26, I could never have imagined this. And yet in those years, this has completely changed. And the way it changed is because our church has a different structure, for better or for worse. We don't have a Pope Francis saying, this is important. Everyone pay attention to this, as he did with the beautiful Laudato Si encyclical. We have a process of change within the church that's modeled on Congress, actually. So we have elected representatives from our parishes who gather, and our diocese who gather and bring up new topics like, I think we should be marrying gay couples. And it took years of bringing it up and conversations. So I think the point of this is it did change, and it happened through relationship and conversations year after year. It didn't happen quickly. It was people continuing to show up and sit at tables together, even when they disagreed. Taking brave stances to tell their personal stories. And somehow through all of that, things changed. The church the parish that I grew up in was quite conservative. And I think over half of the members left when gay marriage was approved and the ordination of gay bishops was approved. So there's cost to it and there are separations. But I think there's hope to me in that process of communication. So I think as a model for how something like rights of nature, which is such a strange concept that people can't get, it's just continuing to have conversations and showing up and staying in relationship as much as we can. And that, I don't know, I think there's a way forward through communication and trying to stay in relationship.
I agree with all that, and I don't want to put all just talk, the church sure had a role to play in this separation, but, there was other things too. I was doing some research and it's like science, obviously has a huge role, right, in there. And again, it's not about blame. It's like that. That's why we started with truth at our event, the truth, right? It's because you have to be able to acknowledge and be honest about some of these things. And it was really hard for some of the people there. I know it was, before you can then move to a different place, right? And have a different perspective and cultural shift. But, I appreciate, because I was thinking even nature herself played a role, because when I was going back through history and looking at some of it, like how the Black Plague in 1347, it was to 1349, a third of the population of Europe died. And people didn't know why at the time. And so, this fear then of, nature and the natural world. So there's things like that took place. But I appreciate what you're saying too, Leanna, about when we're in it, it's hard to see it, right? Because you're in the middle of this time, when you think of I guess history and that and what we're as a timeline, right? And it's easy to look back because we've seen what happened, but when you're in the midst of it and we can make predictions for the future, but it's that present. And you think it's not we want everything to change tomorrow. And with this technology we have today where everything's instantaneous, it's the idea that this is going to take time. How long? We don't have that time. I mean, I used to get really upset about hearing that, right? We have to do this now because we're running out of time. And I'm but that's way too much pressure. I mean, I can't operate like that. We have to just what you're all saying is we're in the moment, and we have to do what we do in the moment, in the places we are. And collectively, that makes a difference.
Just so needed to hear from both of you, Leanna and you, Tish, because I'm such an impatient woman. And I'm yeah, no, but it's a crisis. And no, it's no, it's the conversations over and over without the judgment, without the hurry up and, you're being dumb. But it's it's like water on stone, right? And that's not the story I want to it's not the story I want to embody, but it's the real thing. And I don't think the quick change necessarily lasts. It's kind of sometimes can be kind of cosmetic because you just make people afraid to say what they're really thinking. So just continuing to say it over and over and over for you and not get, I always return to Susan B. Anthony was a Rochester native, and she did not see women get the vote. She spent her whole life working on that. So it's like, okay, it's the work that's important, not attachment to exactly when and how it pans out. Hard to live that.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I get it. And it's like, because we also have human egos too, right? And our culture is very much about it's ego driven and celebrity culture and all that stuff. So yeah, it's very difficult sometimes. But yeah, just focusing on really the work and your to me, that's why it keeps coming back to your morals and values and what's, and yeah, if you follow those, then the work you're doing is like going in that direction. At least that's how I try to get through it. And just to give you some hope, Holly, I personally, every day at CELDF, I get emails, right, from people all over the country and the world, and they're asking, about our work with rights of nature and lawmaking and governance and all that stuff. And they're asking about how to resist and to be resilient now. And so that's encouraging to me because before, even just a year ago, the emails were more like, okay, can you help me file a lawsuit to stop the pipeline? Can you help me file a lawsuit to stop fracking? But now it's more like, no, what can we do? What guidance can you give us to become more resilient where we are and resistant? And so it's like, I can feel this shift. So if that gives you any hope.
Very much so. That's fantastic to hear.
So do you think that's a good question? I don't know what other questions you have, because I think this is what's being talked about. How can we resist? And how can we be more resilient? I mean, this is the question that's being asked by several groups. There have been webinars on this. One of the sisters I lived with just came back from a retreat where the topic was on resilience. So I was just wondering if I don't know if you had any other questions, but I was thinking this might be a good thing because here we are. Holly is part of the New York State Justice Promoters Group, as is Alry and Pat, not part of ROAR. Leanna is part of ROAR, not that group. But it might be good just for us to hear each other, and maybe it'll be of value to someone else who's listening to this podcast. How do we see the ways that we resist and we are able to be resilient and to grow in resilience?
Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I mean, for me, I'm a Jesuit based, so there's the Jesuits have this long spiritual exercise practice you go through, and I've been a prayer guide in that for many years. But the practice and I think this practice works for anybody. You don't have to be Catholic. You don't have to be Christian. It's called a daily examine. And every day you go through and you're like, what are you grateful for? What are you not grateful for? Or you could say, where did I feel God's presence? Where did I feel like I was turned away? Or you could use whatever. There's a lot of different ways you can approach it. What made me impatient? Where did I show some grace? And you kind of sort through your day. You go back over your day. I heard it called like rummaging through a bag. You're not trying to control and find the thing. You're just what pops up for you. And then you pay attention to that. And that might be the place where you're like, okay, here's where I was stressed out and maybe too impatient. Here's where maybe there's a little light that might lead me, to do the next thing. Or here's something that somebody said that really resonated that I'm really going to spend some time with. And to me, it helps with resilience. It certainly helps with patience, and it helps with resistance, because one of the things we have to resist like everything, really, right? I mean, the economy, the way the government's set up, but we also have to resist that voice of despair. We have to resist that voice of, well, this is the way it is, and you're being weird and dreamy, back to weird. But like that sense of like that's just pie in the sky. To resist the voices of worldview, of cultural view. And so if you do that, and it takes like, you're supposed to spend, no more than 10 minutes, but you could do 5 minutes a day of just sort of getting in touch with what's going on inside yourself, so that you can kind of stay grounded and you don't get buffeted around. Because I think, especially like, I have my phone here and I'm doom scrolling after dinner. It's easy, right, to get buffeted about and lose the thread. So that's one like just little personal practice, but I offer it out because I think we all need that at this point, all of us who are trying to do something.
That's really helpful, Holly. I love that. Yeah, and it reminds me back to if any of you took our democracy school, we used to talk about the black hole of doubt. That's the thing that keeps us the most, from doing the things that we feel are right or in our gut, right? Like it's that, we talk ourselves out of it. Yeah.
The who am I to? That's the one I talk about a lot. It's like, who am I to fill in the blank? Well, I'm just me. I'm just like feet of clay for sure.
As I hear Holly speak, I'm aware that one of the things ROAR has always tried to do is bring together all our colleagues to talk with each other. And especially now, I'm finding people turning to each other in wonderful ways. And Carol has led some discussions online that have helped people to really grow deeply into what we truly value and how we can go about achieving these things that we value. And we have meetings regularly with our sisters across the country where we share different things that they're doing. And some are speaking about just dealing with the people who come into their lives and putting out the truth as they see it. And some go to demonstrations, and there are so many more of those. And I'm finding strength from the few that we've participated in, just seeing people state the truth. And the more that's put out there, I think, the more we will come to a way of achieving that truth.
We have our new book out, Can You Handle the Truth? And it's like, and that and so it's like, even me, like I'm questioning sometimes, like, but this idea of what is the truth, right? And can what you believe today and what you think is the truth today, a year from now or whatever, can that shift, right? And it might, based on who you come in contact with or what experiences you have or, different things. And so it's like really interesting to me, and kind of, that we're constantly, again, back to that, we're always evolving, right? And it's like to not be so set in your thinking. I mean, at least to be open-minded. It doesn't mean you're going to agree with everyone, and to be able to critically think about some of our issues and what you've been exposed to try and like figure out what is the truth, right? It's very difficult. And yeah, with the technology and the phones and the doom scrolling, it is hard to separate all that. We only have 10 minutes left. So I just want to, before we go though, I want to make sure that, you guys, if there's any final like thoughts or topics that we didn't cover that you want to address, that you have the opportunity to do that. It's something you'd want to say to people listening.
I was just thinking back to the question that you had asked or posed, Carol, about what keeps us motivated and resilient. And something that you said, Holly, just made me think about, for me, the answer goes back to nature again and relationship with nature. And I'm remembering during the pandemic how often we were getting out and walking and canoeing and kayaking, and there wasn't a whole lot else to do. So spending time in nature was something that was just, I did more and I felt differently. And I remember at one point, I think I was upset about something that was happening in the news. And I was just aware as I was walking and looking at the trees, this is real too. There's this, our attention is like sucked in. I feel like my attention is sucked straight to those bad news stories, which are there and are real and need to be paid attention to. And there's also something else that's real and something else to be paid attention to. And it's getting out and seeing it, and I think about the more that I've learned, I feel like about nature and the importance of developing my relationship with nature, quite honestly, the less I've been doing it. Like I need to get myself out there. It's hard to do it. It's hot. It's cold or it's raining. Like it's not comfortable or easy. And there is so much else to take our attention. But I feel like there is something very healing and motivating about that, but it does take that discipline to get yourself. Speaking for myself, I don't do it enough. And this conversation's been helpful. I'm going to try to get out there more this weekend, if it's not raining.
It resonates for me, that's sure. Yeah.
And 90 degrees, like but I just something. I feel like the answer is back in nature itself,
So what I've appreciated this conversation too. So the thought that's been coming to my mind is, there's a phrase that Teilhard de Chardin talks about, the zest for life, the zest for life, and how we need to have this zest for life. And, he really helped connect us to the earth, and to the marvelous gift that earth is, and the spirituality of earth. And so then I'm thinking of Tom Berry and how he has said that we've lost our sense of awe. And so when we talk about being in nature, there is something where it's kind of a continuum, that the experience of awe brings us to that sense of beauty and wonder. And I think he says religion grows out of that. Religion doesn't come first. Religion comes from our ancestors having that great experience, and they were so much a part of nature and experiencing the awe, the beauty, the wonder, and then this religion developed. And so I know what I have been feeling for a while, and how to do it is a real challenge, is how do I get in touch with the spirituality of the earth? Because Tom Berry's very clear that if we lose our connectedness with earth, the more we're separated from earth, we're separated from our spirituality, that we get our spirituality from earth. And when you think about it, when you think about what spirituality is and the understanding of who God is, and we all have different understandings of God, but we do this as embodied people. So we're spiritual beings, but we're embodied, spirits. And so for me, what does it really mean to get in touch with earth? Earth as healer, earth as teacher, earth as mother, earth as, the source from which I've grown, I've come from. And that there is this energy that comes, and then we talk about earth, we talk about the universe. There is this, what does Brian Swim talk about? Comprehensive compassion, that through this evolving universe, where out of the split explosion, that curvature, where if it was too speedy, it would have blown apart. If it was too slow, it would have caved in on itself. But out of this energy that was created, this energy, in a sense, has grown into this love, where we as conscious human beings are conscious of earth, where we're earth conscious, that we humans really have grown into this awareness of what love is, and he sees love as growing. So I guess the easiest way to say this is, I just feel that getting out in nature and hearing what you're saying, when we do that, we are being put in touch with this great mystery of the connectedness of life and this earth being. And there's so much that we have to learn from it, and how we as humans need to work as part of it and not apart from it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Hope that makes sense in some way.
Yeah, no, and we talk about that too, and gone through that, living from nature, living as nature, but it's like that we are nature, right? And so we have to get to that. Rights of nature, to me, is like, that's just a step to where we need to get. It's not the end all be all, because even talking about nature is something separate, right? Like, nature's out there, nature's in the parks, but we each ourselves are nature, right? We're one species on earth, and we're our nature, made up of everything from the earth.
No, exactly. And I was thinking, Leanna reminds me it's so easy to be like, oh, I don't have time for that, right? But it's so foundational to be outside, and not to be outside like, you see all these wellness articles, and great to get people outside. It's going to lower your cortisol, whatever. But just because it is being part of what we are, like it is connecting to awe and wonder, connecting to mystery, and just it's part of our being. And I just want to throw in the weird factoid of you have more microbes living in and on you than you have cells in your body. So you are not even just, your face is
a single being. Yeah.
You're not a single being. You're an ecosystem. So, take your ecosystem out and lie down in the grass, Yeah.
Let some of those microbes get outside.
Let them have a little air.
Well, that whole idea that then comes back to protecting the waters, right? It's a good way to sum this up, right? Because every poison and every permit we give to allow poison to go into the water, it's coming into us. I mean, the plastics we're dumping into the Great Lakes, into the Hudson River, and the radioactive, that's coming back to us. And we're seeing it. It's in our blood. And I laugh too when you talk about, Holly, the people to be healthy, get outside to be healthy. And I always laugh. I go ahead, walk all you want, drink your big bottles of bottled water and all that stuff. But if it's poisoned and polluted, I don't care how many miles you walk on the treadmill,
Right.
the air you're breathing has poisonous particulates in it. You're just breathing heavier and more of them in when you do that. So, there's this you can't have, be healthy if nature isn't healthy.
Nature. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.